Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, and in today's video we're going to be doing the How I Read book tag. This is another one of the book tags I found off of the ZZ with Books blog. She has a page titled A Long List of Book Tags, and I've been going through and just cherry picking a few that I think look fun or interesting. This one stood out to me because it's less about book recommendations and books that I read and more about how I go about reading. And so I feel like with a lot of these book tags, I'm going to fall into a pattern of recommending the same types of books. And here at least we can talk about some of my reading habits rather than my actual suggestions for what to read. Starting off with question number one, do you have a certain place in your house to read? I have a couple of different places that I tend to read. There is a sofa in our library that I will go to if things are hectic around the house or if it's very distracting out in the living room. But mostly I get my reading done on our huge pit couch. So about a year ago, in fact, almost exactly a year ago from now, we bought this huge deep couch because we have two kids and we have friends over a lot of Fridays. It is nice to have the deeper couch where the kids can be roughhousing or being ridiculous and we can still sit and have space. Or if we have friends over, we can actually pull out the central cushion, set a table up for gaming or a central table to set up sodas and food. We can have a nice afternoon with our friends or a nice evening with our friends. Because the couch is like extra deep, it is really nice to just crash into and stretch out on and read. I have a little cozy corner that I enjoy reading in. So that's kind of my number one spot. That tends to be the place that I read the most. Question number two is, can you just stop reading whenever, or do you have to read to the end of a chapter or a certain number of pages? And while I certainly like to set goals for the day, like I want to read 100 pages today, or I'd really like to get to page 300 by the end of the day, I can stop pretty much wherever and pick up again. I've gotten into that habit even more because recently I've picked up audiobooks, and I'll listen to audiobooks while I am working on the dishes or when I have my conference period at work. And then when that time's up or when that task is done and I have to move on to something else, I just have to stop what I'm listening to. I can't necessarily sit and listen for another 15-20 minutes to get to the end of the chapter. I've acclimated myself to just stopping whenever and picking up whenever. Question number three is, do you prefer bookmarks or do you just use random scraps of paper? I've used pretty much everything to mark my place in books, including other books that I then place inside of the first book to set its place. Like I've done that before. I really do prefer bookmarks. I realize this gives me the opportunity to talk a bit about the bookmarks that I've collected and kind of show off my bookmark collection. Recently, my wife and I organized all the Fairy Loot bookmarks that I've been getting, so it's more likely that I will pick up and use these in the future now that they're all kind of in one place and neatly organized. And I love the way this looks. I also really love the Brandon Sanderson Secret Project bookmarks. My favorite one isn't here. I'm not quite sure where it went. I thought it was on my bedside table, but it's not there. But these are lovely and they're thick and like really high quality. So these are amazing. I love these. I also have this bookmark. This is probably the bookmark that I have the most attachment to, the most sentimentality attached to it. I received this bookmark from a student in Japan that I was teaching. So it's a reminder of my time there. It's a reminder of that student. She was one of my special needs students while I was teaching in Japan, and she was always really sweet, and she gave this to me as a gift for Tanabata, I believe, and it just has stuck with me for the longest time, and I've made sure to keep this somewhere safe and use it quite frequently. Question number 4 is, do you play music or have the TV on while you're reading? Multitasking is not a thing. I don't want to have a video on while I'm reading, but we will put on Spotify, and there are several reading lists, or if I'm reading Stormlight Archives, there are Stormlight Archive playlists. There are videos on YouTube that are just relaxing music. I use them for my classes while the students are reading, and I really just enjoy that. It helps to put me in that mindset and put me in that mood to calm down and focus on reading. So I will put music on and I'll put those videos on, but I don't want to have like a movie going or something playing in the background. That's going to be too distracting, and that's going to draw my attention, I think, more than the reading. Whether we like to admit it or not, reading is a more difficult and more involved process than, watching a movie or just, passively sitting. Question number 5 is, do you only read at home or do you read everywhere? I am an English teacher. I read everywhere. I read in class. My students get 10 minutes a class period 3 times a week to read, and I join them while they're doing that. I read during my conference period if I don't have anything else going on. I read when I go out to eat. Listen to audiobooks in the car. I listen to audiobooks walking to the store to get snacks in the afternoon. I listen to audiobooks while I am cleaning or working around the house or working around my classroom. So as often as possible, as much as possible, I try to read. I don't just limit that to my time at home. Question number 6 is, do you read one book at a time or do you read several? And I read a lot. It used to be where I really couldn't do more than one book at a time because it was really difficult for me to separate out different books. If I read things that are too close together, like 2 YA romantasy titles at the same time, that really messes with me, and it's hard for me to separate the 2 stories. That can be a real problem. Nowadays, I tend to read a book for myself. I tend to be reading a manga or a graphic novel. I tend to be listening to an audiobook, which is oftentimes different than the book I'm reading for myself. And I tend to have a book I'm reading for class, and also potentially one that I'm reading for my literary criticism group. So that's up to 5 books at a time that I'm reading. And so it's helpful to have those be separate titles and separate kinds of books so that they don't get jumbled. Now, usually the stuff for school tends to be nonfiction, literary canon type writing, classics and things like that. And my reading tends to be fantasy. The audiobook experience helps separate that out. So, and then of course the graphic novels are a completely different creature, and usually I'm not having to set those down and come back to them. When I start a graphic novel, I tend to read it in one sitting because it only takes about an hour or so to get through most of those. Question number 7 is, do you read out loud or do you read in your head? And reading out loud would just absolutely not work in my house at all. I read in my head. I've recently learned that not everybody has an internal monologue, which I find really fascinating. But yeah, I read in my head for sure. Question number 8 is, do you ever read ahead or do you skip pages? So here's something I haven't talked about to anyone, I don't think. It's not something I've done for a long time. But I used to pick up a book and I would read the last line of the book, and then I'd go back and read the book and like be thinking about how do we get to that last line. And for a while that was fun. I no longer do that, and I absolutely do not skip anything in books, and I don't jump ahead. I don't read further into the books because I want to avoid spoilers as much as possible, especially in the digital age and going on to Goodreads to look at reviews and things like that. It can be hard enough to avoid spoilers that I don't want to do that to myself. Question number 9 is one that I have to think about a little bit. It asks if you break the spine of your book or if you try to keep them like new. And I think it really depends on the type of book. So it's not like I am rough with books intentionally, but I do think that I am less careful with my mass market paperbacks than I am with my hardcovers. Case in point, I have my copy here of The Lost Metal. And you can see even with a single reading, that's pretty beat up. In fact, if you turn to the last few pages here, you can see where it's actually tearing away from the rest of the book. And that was not intentional. I did not mean to do that. But because of the way that I hold books, especially these mass market paperbacks, I tend to hold with my thumb like this and hold the book open like this. And that's putting a lot of pressure down here at the bottom of the spine. And so with a thicker book like this, that damage is just naturally going to happen. I'm actually really kind of worried about this one. It's not happened this bad in a while, but again, it's not intentional. I'm not trying to beat up my books. It just happens to be that's how I hold them, and that's what happens to them. I feel like I'm more careful with a large hardcover because I can't be holding it that way. I have to be two hands, doing like this. I think it really depends on the book, how beat up it's going to get from me handling it. Question number 10 is, do you ever write in books? The answer to that question is no, but I am starting to think about doing that, especially for some of these books that I own multiple copies of, that I plan on returning to, or that have these really sprawling epic storylines. So in particular, I'm thinking about books like the Cosmere, Mistborn Era 2, and the Stormlight Archives. I am gradually collecting the hardcover special editions that they release, and I'm thinking about going into my mass market paperbacks and doing the highlighting and annotating of some of the connections between the books, trying to get like timelines and things like that. Very useful for things that you plan on analyzing and critiquing. And for me, because analyzing and critiquing literature is literally my job, a lot of my reading for myself, my personal reading, I try to avoid that as much as possible. And so it's only with these books that I feel like I want to make connections and write down information that I would even consider doing it. But even with that itch, and even with this YouTube channel kind of pushing that kind of mentality, I've not done it yet, and I am very hesitant to do so. And now it's tag time. I'm going to tag my wife over at Amanda Should Be Reading. I'm going to tag Amber Elise Reads, which I just came across due to her Stormlight Archives review, which I found really cool. It was really fun to see someone start on that journey. And I'm going to tag Books Are Sick because I think that's a fun channel. Of course, anyone who's watching this who wants to join the tag is welcome to do so. I found this one a lot of fun to put together and to think about, and it stretched a little bit more of thinking about my reading habits more than just what is the new hotness for me or what is the thing that I would recommend that would inevitably show up on every video. Feel free to put down in the comments your reading habits. How many books are you reading at once? Where do you read? Do you read only at home? How do you feel about marking up books? Just let me know and let's start a conversation. As always, please like and subscribe to help us grow this corner of our BookTube community. I hope that your reading journey is going well, and until the next one, take care.